Good afternoon. It's not morning. And good Thursday. It's not Sunday. It's a special episode of The Rotation. And boy, have we got a lot to talk about. So let's jump into the rotation. Well, we are broadcasting from all over the place. Of course, the main place is 1714 7th Avenue in Ybor City, where it all began over at Killam. And below me is the guy who's in there right now, our deputy director, Carlos Armida, our professional onanist and master of business administration.
Hello,
I, of course, your political director, Gary Stein. And to my right, your left, no, to my left, your right, one of the two, is our executive director, Christopher Cano. He's coming to you from above the Beltway where he hits him below the Beltway. And right below Chris, we have our special guest today, the political director of National NORML, Morgan Fox. Welcome to the rotation.
Thanks for having me, guys.
That was fun.
You've had a kind of a busy week. We've all had a busy week. I am dead tired from the midterms. I mean, Florida, saying that we got hurt is kind of like saying that we lost a few seamen at Pearl Harbor. We really did. It wasn't that scale, but we got hit politically pretty darn hard. We had endorsed quite a few candidates, many of which we had interviewed here, and a good portion of them lost for no good reason that I could see. And we lost some people terming out and things of that sort. And so we're going to have to build a new network in the Florida House to go ahead and achieve our agenda. And nationally, I think we did better, didn't we?
Significantly. I think across the country, within the states, there were a lot of wins, a lot of losses. Things were really all over the place. But federally, I think we're in a really good position. Number one, we don't have to deal with Senate Majority Leader McConnell. That would have been incredibly problematic. And I think that if we were going to keep one chamber that is the most in favor of cannabis policy reform, having the Senate be that one is definitely the one that I would prefer. And then in the House, there's going to be a pretty even toss-up and no real clear majority because all the parties are kind of fractured right now. But I think that given the massively growing public support for cannabis policy reform across the political spectrum, that we're going to have a lot easier time getting Republicans on board than we have in the past, especially seeing that the vast majority of their electorate now is starting to move in this direction. We're already got a slim majority, particularly among younger Republicans, and that's only going to continue to grow.
I mean, you still got Matt Gaetz in there, which is a good thing and a bad thing, of course, because he is pro-cannabis in part because of his own dad's views and because he saw it as politically profitable here in Florida in a number of ways. But what other Republicans do we have still on our side in the House?
I mean, it's a pretty decent list. I think chief among them, we have to talk about Tom McClintock. He has long been a proponent of sensible cannabis laws in this country and has been a person that's willing to cross the aisle in order to make that happen, whether it be through standalone legislation or through things like appropriations amendments. So we also have Nancy Mace, who ran a bipartisan hearing just this week with Jamie Raskin from Maryland, another longtime cannabis policy reform proponent. And I got to say, I mean, I was sitting in the room and it was probably the most supportive, not only witness list, but also in terms of like the questions that lawmakers asked, really just phenomenal. Probably the best hearing that I'd seen. And I think it's indicative of a recognition that this is going to be an issue that has to be addressed in the upcoming session beyond what we can potentially accomplish in the lame duck right now. And a recognition that there is growing bipartisan support for this. Of course, you had the obligatory marijuana kills people speech from Pete Sessions from Texas, who also compared cannabis legalization to slavery, by the way. And was amazingly like called out by not only witnesses but also called out by members of his own party. Nancy Mace was very clear in rejecting that language, and
good.
She's been a strong leader on this issue. I think she's going to continue to be so. She, with the States Reform Act, has really raised the floor of where Republicans are on this issue. And this is a bill that deschedules cannabis. It sets a super low tax rate for cannabis businesses at the federal level. And it has a ton of protections in it for tribal sovereignty, for veterans. This is, I think, where the direction is heading, regardless of party. And to see that happening, in the midst of contentious elections is really heartening for the prospect of cooperation across the aisle in the upcoming session.
And how about the Senate? Do we still have proponents in the Senate? It's a slim majority, but every once in a while we have our Manchins and other folks that kind of put a wrench in our gears. And who can we rely on when those things go sour?
Well, I mean, for the first time ever, we actually have Senate Majority leadership leading the way on this issue. Senator Schumer has been really fantastic in prioritizing and publicly supporting reform here. And, while there's still a lot to be done in the lame duck, and I think that it's going to be tough, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we can get some incremental reforms passed. We already just yesterday passed the first standalone cannabis policy reform bill in history since cannabis was criminalized. Or I guess I should say since cannabis consumers were criminalized. It's a research bill that will help streamline applications for clinical research and human studies, as well as allow additional applications and a more streamlined process to help facilitate research-grade cultivation, so that federally approved researchers don't have to rely on the garbage that's being grown in the University of Mississippi. While this bill doesn't go as far as we wanted it to, and Representative Earl Blumenauer from Oregon, really pushed for a more expansive version of this that would actually let researchers be able to legally access products that are available in state legal markets. What people are actually consuming, as opposed to the federally grown garbage. But unfortunately, that provision did not survive the reconciliation process. But it's still really important that we, for the first time ever, passed standalone legislation. We've passed appropriations amendments before, we've passed riders before, and those have really helped move us along. But this is the first piece of legislation by itself specifically to reform cannabis laws and remove barriers to research, or just remove any of the issues that have been caused by prohibition. So symbolically, I think this is really huge. And we have an opportunity now with, I believe, 14 or 15 days left in the current legislative session to potentially pass even more broad-reaching legislation, including federal funding for state-level expungement efforts, for easing access for banks to be able to work with the legal cannabis industry, and to prevent discrimination against people of color who are trying to get into the industry and are trying to get traditional lending. I think that we have the possibility to be able to get protections for veterans across the board in the lame duck. So, but it's really just a matter of timing, and the clock is ticking before things become a little bit more difficult with a Republican-controlled House who, while we think there will be a lot of support among members of Congress on both sides of the aisle, there are still some old guard Republicans who are not on board that will likely be in very powerful committee positions next session and could potentially slow things up.
Well, Morgan, I'm glad you mentioned that. Is Nancy Mace being the ranking member, would she essentially be the one who would take over the Judiciary Committee, and having her as an ally, being a committee chair, would we still be able to get legislation out of committee onto the House floor?
So for that hearing, that was a subcommittee hearing on civil rights and civil liberties. And that's a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee. So Representative Mace would not be taking over ownership of or control of that committee. Probably, I think it's entirely possible. And honestly, it would be great if she was in charge of as many committees as possible, because she's fantastic on this issue and has like a really, really powerful personal story about her experiences with medical cannabis and how it helped her and how it's helped her, her members of her family. But I think that in terms of the Judiciary Committee, we're very likely looking at Jim Jordan being the chair of that committee now. And as an Ohioan, I have to apologize. But he has been pretty terrible on this issue, and on a number of others as well. But also some relating to drug policy. In fact, has been kind of an impediment to being able to even allocate federal funds to be able to assist with drug rehabilitation and treatment programs for people that have been or that are either incarcerated in local jails in holding or are exiting that process and awaiting trial. There are tons of grants available through HR 4200 that would directly impact his own jurisdiction. And this money is going not to like nonprofits or anything. This is going to law enforcement and local jails. So you would think that that'd be something that he'd support, but apparently not. It might be an ideological issue with just giving federal grants to anything. But this is the sort of behavior and thinking that we're going to have to deal with in the Judiciary Committee going forward. So again, I think that while there's a lot of possibility for forward movement in the next session, it's going to be very difficult to navigate some of these more backwards thinking members that are in pretty powerful committee positions.
Well, Morgan, I'm glad you said that, because we've caught a lot of criticism over the past several weeks over our candidate endorsements. Some folks have accused us of being overtly partisan, and we've consistently said we're only supporting the candidates who are supporting us as cannabis consumers. And so would it, you being in a nonpartisan role, would it be accurate to say that the last bastion of prohibition exists in the Republican Party in Congress? That's where the holdouts are. I mean, it seems like with the Senate Majority Leader actually sponsoring the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, we have reformers, on one side of the aisle. We have, like you pointed to, people like Nancy Mace on the other side, but there is a last bastion of holdout of these traditional prohibitionists, on the right. Is that accurate to say, or are we being criticized, incorrectly by certain folks?
I mean, if you're looking at it single issue, no, you're not being criticized incorrectly. There are plenty of Democrats that do not support legalization, but there's a lot more of them in the Republican side. And I think that is going to start to steadily change, particularly when lawmakers start to really hear from voters, which is one of the things that NORML has consistently tried to do, is get people to actually reach out to their lawmakers and tell them that not only is this an issue that I support, but it's an issue that I want you to prioritize. And just seeing the overwhelming support that has come from the general public about the Biden administration's pardon and scheduling review announcement, combined with just constant new polls. I mean, Gallup just came out this week with their annual poll showing majority support across every party and much stronger support among younger voters. So any politician that's looking at what the future of their party is going to look like, that's the answer. So you're going to start feeling political consequences, being obstructionist or being in opposition to these reforms. Now, even among supporters in either side, there's going to be a lot of discussion about the details of how we end prohibition, how we repair the harms caused by the war on cannabis and cannabis consumers. And those details are really going to matter and are probably going to cause quite a bit of division. But I have to say, I am very optimistic about where people can find common ground on this issue. And I think that we're only going to see more of that going forward as we continue to see that, not only at the state level do these laws really work, but also that as we start to pass more and more incremental federal legislation and get members of Congress more comfortable with voting for things that are steadily more expansive. This has been the history of cannabis policy reform at the state, local, and at the federal level since this began. So I think that we've got the wind at our back. We just need to keep working.
It is difficult being a single issue situation because, like for instance, my supporting Dana Rohrabacher when he was helping us out so much really conflicted me because of a lot of the other things that he was working on that were totally abhorrent to me. And the same with Matt Gaetz. I mean, I worked with him on SB 1040, which started the cannabis industry here in Florida. But the other things he was working on at that time, I could not abide by. So it's difficult for some folks to if we only had 2 votes instead of 1, like Alaska, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think that when you're at the ballot box determining who is going to be representing you, you have to take a holistic look, and it's probably not wise to just vote based on somebody's position about cannabis policy, but people need to know those positions. And unfortunately, most lawmakers and legislative candidates don't actually post their positions publicly. There was a study a few weeks back by the Brookings Institute that showed that only about 10% of any candidates actually had posted any position on cannabis policy on their websites, whether incumbent or challengers. And the reason for that is because they're not hearing from their constituents that this is a priority issue. So once they feel safe, then they will start taking stronger stands. But at the ballot box, when you're having somebody represent you, you have to look at all the issues that are important to you. Obviously, when you're working with people from a lobbying perspective and from a coalition building perspective, it's absolutely vital to be able to sit down at a table with and work with and collaborate with people that you might be diametrically opposed to on a number of other issues. But you can do good work on one thing. You don't have to necessarily endorse somebody's entire ideology in order to be able to collaborate with them to get work done on something that is important to you and where your interests happen to align.
We have viewers from all over the country right now. And what states do you think we should have our listeners contact their legislators because they're on the border and could be moved in the right direction on this one particular topic?
Well, I think that in the states where the adult use initiatives did not pass, it would be very important for their lawmakers on Capitol Hill to hear from folks that say, hey, look, just because this lost doesn't mean that we don't want you to do something about this at the federal level. So, the Dakotas and Arkansas. But even in, places like Maryland, which I mean is kind of fait accompli, there's so much support there for that. But in Missouri as well, if Missouri residents contact their lawmakers and say, hey, look, this is now the law of the land in this state. You need to represent the interests of the people that live in this state, whether you agree with it or not. That will definitely be helpful in bending the needle. But really, everybody. There's some states that are probably going to be coming up because of changes in the state legislatures. I think I'm really hopeful about Pennsylvania. I'm really hopeful about Minnesota. We could see medical movement legislatively in Tennessee. And we're already seeing a lot of local movement in a number of places. And Texas is now going to have one of its biannual, I guess. So Texas only has legislation or legislative sessions every 2 years, and they've got another one coming up. My colleague, Jax James, who is not only the national state policy manager, but also is the head of Texas NORML, says that she expects there to be like 60 or 70 bills related to cannabis policy reform in Texas alone. So it's going to be a very busy session. Anybody that's following the issue in every single state, really pay attention to what's going on and what's getting introduced in the beginning months of the year when the sessions start ramping up.
I remember the final hours of the last Texas session when they lost everything at the last minute. I always felt like Texas was kind of our orphan cousin that we need to feel bad for, or at least to make ourselves feel better about the way that we have our program running. but Texas has had their issues. Georgia's had their issues. Ohio, sorry, you know what's going on over there. And of course, Michigan, they've got the legislature switched totally around now, but they still have issues that they're trying to iron out of their program right now, which is making it harder for them to go forward, even though they have a fairly good program so far.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but what ballot measures passed this year, and what ballot measures did not? South Dakota has always freaked me out. I mean, Kristi Noem is just an anomaly to me.
Yeah, I mean, the situation in South Dakota was really egregious. You know, in 2020, medical bill passed in the mid 70% approval rating, and the adult use bill passed. I think it was like around 55%. The fact that South Dakota was the first state to pass legalization for adults through a ballot initiative without having a pre-existing medical program was astounding, and in a very deeply red state. But then, of course, the governor used taxpayer money to sue in order to invalidate that measure. The case went originally up in front of a judge that she had appointed, and then the appeal was tossed out by the state Supreme Court. So, I mean, it doesn't get much more corrupt than that. Now, in the months leading up to the most recent election, Governor Noem said that she opposed the initiative, but would not try to interfere with it or invalidate it if it were to pass. Meanwhile, she was actively stumping against it, and there's actually Marijuana Policy Project and the other organizers of that campaign, I believe, are currently involved in at least an investigation, if not a lawsuit, about the use of state money to work against the campaign, which is clearly illegal. But we'll see what the outcome of that investigation is, hopefully pretty soon. But either way, I think that it was not an easy campaign by any stretch of the imagination, and for a number of reasons. And a lot of these reasons also apply to North Dakota and Arkansas as well. So first of all, at least in South Dakota, you have the situation where traditionally voters, when they see the same initiative or a similar initiative on the ballot 2 years in a row, they have a tendency to vote no the second time. Even if they had supported it in the past, they have apparently there's just something in the human brain that says, oh, well, we voted on this already. We didn't pass it. We're not going to support it now. This is something that is true for all issues, not just cannabis. And it is one of those weird things of political science and social democracy that doesn't make any sense. But there it is. But in addition, you also have to think that these are very, very conservative states where there's going to be traditionally much less support for cannabis policy reform. It's a midterm election where older voters who support this issue much less than younger voters turn out in droves, and where generally conservatives tend to have much higher turnout. And it was immediately following the election of a Democratic president, which always triggers a conservative backlash in the midterms with the tendency for people to vote the out party in. So there was almost a perfect storm of conditions working against these campaigns. And amazingly, I mean, they still did a really phenomenal job. And, you know, hats off to everybody, particularly in the Dakotas, for, you know, all the work that they did. I mean, when you're working in a state with that low of population density, you do a lot of driving to reach voters. And it is not an easy job. So, you know, hats off for even doing as well as they did. But, you know, there were a lot of, you know, political and social factors working against them. But, you know, the struggle is the glory, right? We have to just keep working on these states. And, you know, while I think that some of our opponents might try to paint this as, you know, only 2 out of 5 won, it wasn't the clean sweep that we got in 2020, as a loss or as like a cresting of the wave of cannabis policy reform. I look at it as, hey, we got 2 more states where cannabis is legal for adults now and where people are no longer going to be arrested. We're talking about tens of thousands fewer arrests every year just because of the results of that election. I call that a win.
Now, I always thought that the SAFE Act was one of those ones that seemed to be destined to pass. that why would anybody say no to it? But there has been some opposition to it, even in the Democratic Party, hasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are some people that very validly are concerned that it will only open the doors for big business, or that we will continue to see discriminatory lending and predatory lending practices, and that small businesses, and particularly POC-owned businesses, are not going to be able to access that. Those are very valid concerns, given the long history of discrimination in banking and lending in this country. That being said, I think that we really need to be pushing for as many anti-discrimination provisions as possible in that legislation. However, I have talked to more than my fair share of business owners, particularly small business owners, that are concerned about even having a shot at getting a loan. And while safe banking is certainly not a social equity bill, it will definitely help small businesses. What we can do is try to make it better as much as possible. But I also think that it's important that we continue the momentum of passing incremental reform, and for helping as many small businesses as we possibly can. And the only way to do that is to be able to try to minimize their cost of doing business. Like I said, there's very valid arguments and a lot of historical basis for those arguments. But we have to be pragmatic. As I said, it's going to be even harder to get things through the House next year and the following year. So we have to think about the fact that we may be in a position where we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Now, I don't think that there's any chance that safe banking gets across the finish line this year without being attached to some other criminal justice reform. In particular, some form of the HOPE Act, which was introduced by Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and David Joyce, which, again, provides direct funding from the federal government to states that are actively engaged in facilitating expungement. I would love to see more money attached to that, but we can always try to appropriate more next year. And, really, I think that getting as much as we can possibly get right now across the finish line before the end of the current session is going to be vital in terms of setting us up for even further success next session.
Yeah, I know you got to go pretty soon.
Yeah.
So we should all try to get one last question in. I know Carlos was going to ask this one, but he hasn't really said anything about it. We've actually heard that there is bills about to come up here in the state of Florida that's going to make all hemp-derived cannabinoids except for CBD banned from sale in the state of Florida. Do you see anybody in the country doing that as well, besides the crazy folks over here in Florida?
I mean, we've seen a couple of states try to ban or de facto ban things like Delta 8. And honestly, we're not in favor of banning these substances, but they should be heavily regulated, considering that we don't know what they actually do to the human body. And the producers of these products are not operating under any sort of a regulatory structure right now. So you have no idea what is in them at all. So we're of the opinion that any sort of synthetic or novel cannabinoids, particularly ones that can cause inebriation or impairment, should be regulated like Delta-9 THC through existing state programs until the research suggests that they should be regulated in a less stringent manner. But banning them outright isn't really going to do anything, because it's just going to criminalize people. So, not only that, but we have a long history of analog bans, which is basically a form of whack-a-mole, where somebody will develop a synthetic cannabinoid, the DEA will ban it. They'll change a molecule to something that's even less tested on humans. DEA will ban that. They'll change the molecule a little bit more to something that is even more potentially harmful to humans because nobody knows, and then the DEA will ban that. And in the meantime, these products are just coming in and out of gas stations and other unregulated market sources with zero protection for consumers. And it doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
All right, Chris, your turn.
I'm going to say something, Gary. Morgan, the reason why Gary said that was because I actually own a hemp store here in Florida, And to be honest with you, I'll tell you my opinion on the whole thing. They can make hemp illegal, in my opinion. Just go ahead and make cannabis legal. That's my whole opinion. Like it is absolutely ridiculous that these products are out for sale and there's still like one part potentially of the plant that is illegal and like banned from it makes no sense.
Well,
And
you're right. And the reason that these products are so popular is because cannabis is illegal in so many places.
Yeah.
And you see the highest popularity, the biggest
That is
sales
where the demand comes from.
are in prohibition states.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, Morgan, we know you got to go, man. Just one last question as you head on out. Do we have any hope in this lame duck session of getting either the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act passed or one of the other bills, from both houses, like the MORE Act in the Senate?
No chance whatsoever.
All right.
There's no way that descheduling is going to pass in like the 15 days that we have. I mean, that was pretty much known, at the beginning of the year that the votes weren't there to beat the filibuster. But we have a lot of time to work on it very soon. And, there are Republican-led efforts in the House to pass descheduling. There are going to be continued efforts in the Senate to do so in the next session as well. I think that it's going to be an issue of meeting in the middle, but I'm cautiously optimistic that we're going to see movement on comprehensive reform, not just incremental reform, in the next session. The big question is just what it's going to look like and how far reaching it's going to be.
And what year will we have national legalization?
Oh, I don't do the crystal ball. Anything can happen. Politics is black.
Well, Morgan, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day and everything you're doing in the halls of Congress to push reform for cannabis consumers. We really appreciate it. And we'd love to have you back on anytime, man. I
really appreciate you guys having me. Happy to come on anytime.
All right, guys.
All right, well, we got a double header coming up here today, team. So at shortly here around 3, we're actually going to have the Deputy Director of National NORML, Paul Armentano, join us, who actually testified before Congress this week in that hearing that Morgan was mentioning about as they were talking about cannabis, in the House. And, this is significant. You have to think that as far as congressional movement has gone in regards to cannabis, I mean, going all the way back to the 1930s, where you had Harry Anslinger saying things before Congress like, reefer makes darkies think they're better than white men. These are the type of things that were in the congressional record. To now, it's like you have ranking members in both parties, saying this is the right thing to do, this is proper. And then you also still have holdouts saying ridiculous things like comparing cannabis to slavery, as was mentioned. Look, all in all, you have crazy people who do get elected. You have ignorant people who get elected. And you have people who are actually not ignorant, not crazy, but they're taking money from people who have them say wild things in order to maintain the status quo. And so that's why we're here to give you the truth. We're here to break it down. And we're here each and every Sunday in the rotation, making sure that you have the latest in cannabis news. So you can support us by going to Patreon and becoming a supporter of the rotation, making sure that we can continue to bring you amazing guests. Go to patreon.com/SuncoastNormal and become a member. Or you can become a member of Suncoast NORML yourself and be a part of the amazing things we got going on. We have some amazing events. One in particular that's coming up is Thanksgiving weekend. The best blunt in the Bay rolling competition is back, and the defending champion will be there to defend her crown. You'll be going up against the Weed Whisperer if you want to take the title of best blunt roller in Tampa Bay. So definitely step on up. Free admission to Suncoast NORML members. So you got a reason to go ahead and renew your membership dues. It's going to be at Chillum Saturday, Thanksgiving weekend. I'm very excited for that. Thank you, Carlos, for hosting this amazing event. And we look forward to seeing y'all. So we're going to be back here shortly, live again at 3 o'clock. So if you want to tune back in, join us then. And Gary, you got any parting words as we head out?
Yes, I would notice that Dave Marsh had chimed in and wanted to ask about what he could do to help promote decriminalization besides contacting your government reps and joining Florida NORML. First off, do those two. Absolutely. Definitely support NORML because we support you. We support you locally at the state level and the national level. And if you want to write a letter to your representatives or your senators, write them a handwritten letter and have it sent via snail mail. I'm not kidding. In this day and age, the emails get lost in the shuffle, and they hardly even look at any of their voicemails or texts. So if you want to get a letter out, write a handwritten or do it on your laptop or whatever, but send it via a piece of paper they can sit down and read. Better chance of them getting a chance to read it and respond to you, except for Marco Rubio.
Yes, we do have two prohibitionist senators in Florida, Marco Rubio, who was reelected, and Rick Scott, who actually just lost his challenge to take over the Senate Republicans from Mitch McConnell. So, if you want to have the opportunity to replace a prohibitionist senator, you're going to have to wait until 2024, but you will have that opportunity to vote Rick Scott's butt out of office if you're interested in making some real changes in Florida and at the national level. All in all, team, you're right, Gary. We've lost some key allies in the Florida legislature, one in particular being Carlos Guillermo Smith, who lost his seat. Also, State Senator Janet Cruz, who was the sponsor of the bill to provide veterans with free medical cards. So there were some seats that flipped, but, I'm optimistic that some of those new folks coming in, one in particular, Jay Collins, who's a veteran himself, can work with us. And, to Dave's point, that is something you can do is join us for lobby days. Go to a legislative delegation meeting. Take the 2 minutes to sign up and speak. Even if you're going to lambaste your legislators for not doing what they need to do and properly representing you, take those 2 minutes, let your voice be heard and make it happen. But other than engaging your legislators, becoming a member of NORML, feel free to be an activist and do what you can. Host community events, organize something at your local library, or your local civic organization. We're always happy to come in and do a workshop for you, for your community, for our constituents, for making sure that our members and the community at large is educated on this. So by all means, do what you can to spread the word that legalization is the right policy reform to go with. And with that, team, we will see folks in the rotation again shortly, live at 3.